Awesome. Quick tech check. Am I audible? Screen, I can see it is visible.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Hey, Bob. Hi. Thank
Yeah,
you for joining in.
yeah,
We wanted to give folks a few more minutes
of
to start.
course.
But yeah, we can now, I think, get started. We already have around 40 folks. Um, Good evening, good morning, everyone. And hi, I have Michelle with me, who is helping me with the screen sharing. Michelle, you can just keep moving. I'll start with, yeah. Hey, I'm Surbi Gupta. I'll be moderating today's session, and it's on behalf of Friends of Figma Kozhikode. I'm a product designer at Microsoft right now. And apart from this, a mandala artist and a design mentor with nearly 10 years of experience solving the right problems, I would say. This session is streaming live on YouTube, and we are super thrilled to have like such a huge audience joining us. We are expecting a lot of more folks. Before we dive into the event, I would want to introduce the fantastic, like the organizing team of Friends of Figma, uh, who are behind this entire thing. We have Mohammed Fawad, who is the community lead and a product designer at IOCOD Infotech. We have Hafiz, co-founder of FOF and an aspiring product manager. And like I said, we have Michel. He's also co-founder of FOF and a UX designer at Offi Technologies. We'll kick off with the series that we are talking about today. It's a Design Spotlight series, one of the events that we are starting with FOF COE Code. This is all about bringing seasoned designers together so that they can share their journeys, experiences, and insights with us, the community. This is our very first session of the series, and we could not have asked for a better speaker to start with than Bob Baxley. Welcoming our speaker, Bob Baxley, I would want to introduce him a bit. He's a designer, executive, advisor who has built and led UX teams at some of Silicon Valley's most design forward companies, including one of my favorites, Apple, Pinterest, Yahoo, and ThoughtSpot. During a career spanning over 3 decades, he has played a pivotal role in the design of the Apple Online Store, Yahoo Answers, the Apple Store app, Bible Pins, and ClarisWorks. These products have been used by hundreds of millions of people around the world. And he's so committed to recruiting and inspiring the next generation of designers. He continues to mentor individuals and advise organizations that are committed to building a better digital world for all of humanity. Today, we have the privilege of hearing him share his secrets to crafting a seamless product experience. Let's welcome Bob with a round of applause, and we can flood the chat with some nice emojis. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. And I know it's super early morning for you. So, really, really appreciate your time. We are all excited to hear from you. So, all it's over to you.
Wow, look at that with all those emojis. That is amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mushal. Thank you, Surbit, for having me here today. Thanks everybody for joining. I know it's well, it's not horribly late for you guys. What is it? 7:30. I'm actually in Dallas right now. I had to come to Dallas to see my family, so it's not as early as it would have been if I was in California. But yeah, 9 a.m. It's not terribly early. So looking forward to the conversation and seeing what kind of questions people have and offering what advice I can from 3.5 decades in Silicon Valley.
I think I missed last 1 second.
Whoop, did I drop off?
No, no, no. You are audible. You are all audible. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? And you were going to start with some questions?
We can take up, so we have already collected some questions from the audience. We can take them up in the end, and we can start with your conversations first, or your talk first.
Uh, well, so I don't have a talk. As I discussed with Mitchell, we were just going to do it kind of as a Q&A. So if there were some topics that I think had questions that had come in beforehand, so we could kind of take those one at a time if you want to do it that way.
Sure. I have few questions in my bucket, which we took from the audience. Maybe we can start with those. And if there are more coming in the chat, we'll take them one by one.
Yep,
So
sounds good.
maybe I'll start with one of my personal favorites. So we are hearing like about AI everywhere. For me, it's like that, coriander garnish that we put on all the veggies. It's like that. So what impact do you think AI will have on design as a whole and UX research in specific?
Well, I'm not sure we're, I think you may have put AI in a much smaller box than it should be in. At least the parts of Silicon Valley that I run around in, we think of AI kind of on par with the discovery of the wheel and the harnessing of fire. So it's considered to be one of the foundational technologies that's going to revolutionize society as we know it. So I think asking about its impact on design is probably kind of a smaller way to think about it. It will certainly revolutionize the day-to-day work that the people on this call do, but it's going to revolutionize like so much more than that. So I spend a lot of time with ChatGPT. I hope everybody does. ChatGPT, Claude, and others. What I found with ChatGPT is the limitation of ChatGPT is not the technology. It's completely in my own imagination. It's whether or not I can think up something complicated enough to ask it to do. So, for example, I ask it a little bit to help me edit text. I never ask it to generate text. I don't find it to be particularly useful for generating things. I find it really useful for editing things. So a common task is, I'm a little bit older probably than most people on the call. Maybe I think about the world in a slightly different way that could be misinterpreted sometimes. I used to ask my young adult children to read posts that I might put on LinkedIn and see if there was anything that might be misconstrued. Now I can actually use ChatGPT. So one of the most effective techniques you can use when you're working with ChatGPT is to tell it at the beginning of your prompt who you want it to be. So you might say, I want you to be a 25-year-old product designer looking for a job on LinkedIn. You read this from a seasoned industry executive. What's your response? And then ChatGPT can give me some input. And that's actually been super useful. Another technique that you can use is actually also at the end of your prompt, before you ask it to go do anything, you tell it to ask you 10 questions to help clarify the prompt. So for example, I use ChatGPT for travel planning or for scheduling workouts and things like that. So you might tell it you're an exercise specialist or an exercise and nutrition coach who specializes in working with people 55 and older. One of your clients wants to go on a long bike ride. You need to set up a training plan for them. What are 10 questions you have before going off and executing this request? And then it'll kind of interview you and help you through that. Using ChatGPT in that way has just been transformational for me. I also, the other piece I use it for that is just mind-bogglingly cool is using it to create little code snippets. So another example there is the Tour de France bike race took place this summer, really famous multi-stage race in France. It's 21 stages over 24 days, if I recall, something like that. And the calendar, there was no place where I could download an ICS file and see the calendar, so I couldn't see all the stages on my calendar in the actual time. So I went to ChatGPT. I asked it to help me create a calendar. It actually created a Python script that I could use to generate the ICS file. Then I could execute then I ran the Python script on my local Mac, and that automatically generated the ICS file. And that opened up a whole level of a whole new set of ideas about how to use ChatGPT to generate these files. Which again, every time I kind of poke at it, I realize that the limitation is actually my imagination and me thinking of more complicated things to ask it. And if all you're asking it for is to help you write a cover letter or something, like that's not really, you're not even scratching the surface of it. So to go back to your original question, My best advice would be just to use it all the time. If you can pay for the upgraded model, the paid models are way better than the free models, like wildly better than the free models. I would try to learn a little bit what's actually going on with the technology. There's a terrific book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, who's a business school professor here in the United States. I found that to be sort of a really useful guide for getting started. Um, it is mind-boggling technology, unlike anything I've ever seen, unlike anything humanity's ever seen. Like we've never seen a self-learning technology like this. And I don't think there's any precedence in nature for a technology or for any kind of organism really to grow and improve at the rate that it's doing. So I would encourage you to kind of think of it as an alien intelligence. You know, it's as if we've been visited by Martians and they are living amongst us. And you should go out and talk to them and see what they can do because they can do a lot. So
That was interesting. Alien intelligence. I love that term. And also, when you said that, hey, your advice on that we should keep using it or we should use it more and more, being a designer, let's say, obviously not let's say we are designers, so how we can use it more responsibly, like what things to keep in mind so that we are not misusing it.
do you mean like in the do you mean as AI is getting manifested in the products we're creating or in our individual usage of it?
In the product area.
Yeah, so in the product area, like, look, I don't know how many product managers are on the call. Typically, what we're seeing with tech companies right now is they're just taking this slap and dash approach, and they're just trying to see how they can sprinkle AI through this thing because they know they're going to get higher valuations if they can say the product is AI driven. And we saw that in the work I was doing at ThoughtSpot. And you see it in stuff that's coming out from all these various companies. Most of that work's not going to survive because most of it's not actually that interesting. You have to find and I don't have any silver bullet for you here. This is like a fundamental rethink of what products can do and how users need to think about them. Again, the way I describe it is if you have a set of Lego bricks, right? It's for a very long time. If you look at Lego, they just had all the regular bricks, and they just made models out of the regular bricks. And then there's a different style of Legos called Technic. And Technic Legos include like these rods and gears and all sorts of different pieces that allow you to make Lego kits that move and that grow and can shift around. And if you look at the history of Lego, it's kind of interesting. When they first came out with the Technic stuff, they didn't really re-whack the models. They just sort of like put a few Technic pieces onto existing, squared out Lego kits. But now, if you look at it today, there's really, really sophisticated Technic sets that are kind of Technic from the ground up. Like they rethought them with Technic in mind. And I think that's where we're going to get with AI. Is there a way that you can throw out everything that you've done so far and start over again, realizing you have AI at the beginning? Now, it may take another 5 years for companies to figure that out. But even with the recent work that's coming out from Apple with the Apple Intelligence stuff that they're putting into their iWork suite, there's some text editing and text enhancing pieces that they've put into Keynote and numbers and pages and stuff. That's probably the best design, the best implementation of that approach, but it's still a really straightforward thing. Like we're basically going to sprinkle this text enhancer into our existing products. And let's face it, in that manifestation, in all due respect to Microsoft and Google, they're doing the same thing in their word processing type products. Basically they've created enhanced versions of Grammarly and just stuck that into the product. That's very different from imagining a word processor where maybe there's some version of a word processor when you start, the first thing it does is it interviews you for what you want to write. And then you're in an interviewing type model. You do that, and then it generates the document for you. Maybe that's where things end up. I'm not quite sure, but I think people need to have designers in particular, like all of us, but designers in particular, we need to have the breathing space to go back to first principles and reimagine these products with AI at the base. And unfortunately, again, the tech industry is in a big race because there's a lot of money on the line, as there always is. And so it's sort of like what's the quickest, cheapest thing we can do to get something in the market? And there's nothing yet that's really all that revolutionary. I'll also make one last plug. Like I know there's this thought. You hear it a lot on LinkedIn and Threads and other places. There's a thought that certainly there's going to be some better user interface into AI than chat. People seem to think that like chat is just this temporary state, and eventually you're going to have some other user interface to interact with these models. And I'm not totally convinced that's true. Um, these AI models, it really is a conversation. For me, I think of when I'm working with ChatGPT, I feel like I'm working with like the world's best college intern ever. I give it a request. I have to do a little tuning. I ask it to ask me questions. It comes back with results that are like 85% of what I want. If I give it a little bit better input, it gets me better results. It's like this incredible college intern. And those interactions are an interview, and they are a back and forth kind of conversation. So chat seems like a pretty good way to do that. Maybe it comes to voice chat at some point, and I think that you can already do. But I still think that conversational style of back and forth may be where a lot of this stuff lands.
Yeah, that makes sense. I again liked the point where you said that uh, first when you said that when you used it for writing a Python code. So I think being a designer, we are not just using it at the surface level. Rather, maybe it's like a no code thing, right? For me, that okay, I am a designer, but I'm leveraging the tech part of it, maybe to collaborate or support my teams better. So that was lovely. I'll have a request for Michelle. Michelle, maybe we can remove this presentation mode and we can have a general mode. Anyways, we are not switching the slides. So, yeah, that would be great. Moving forward, another question on this note, because we have a lot of students here or folks who are aspirants or gonna start in the design industry. What advice would you give to them in general and with the new, AI thing coming up?
Yeah, what I tell young designers all the time is that you have to think of yourself as working in the medium of software. And so let me back up and explain that a little bit because it's a useful story. In about 2016, I had just left Pinterest and was spending a lot of time driving up and down Silicon Valley. And you may remember there was a very important presidential election in the United States in 2016. And I was sort of wondering just what the heck we had done and what kind of world we had created with products like Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. And during that process, I ended up coming across this podcast called Raw Data. And in that podcast, there was a season where they talked about the history of Silicon Valley. And it started with an episode called Monument to a Dead Child, which was about the founding of Stanford University. And it went up through the testimony of Mark Zuckerberg in front of the US Congress in 2016, 2017. In the context of that, history of Silicon Valley, it helped me reconnect to the hippie roots of Silicon Valley. And people don't think about it today, but really Silicon Valley and indeed personal computing as we experience it today came out of the counterculture movement, the hippie movement in the United States in the late 1960s. And in this podcast, they reference this particular book called From Counterculture to Cyberculture. And that book starts with a really fantastic quote that really honestly kind of changed my life. So the quote is to the effect of you have to ask why it was that personal computing got started in Northern California in the late 1960s, when at the time every tech company in the United States was located on the East Coast. And the answer is that there was a small group of people living in and around Stanford University that saw software as a new form of media on par with movies, music, and books. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, like that just sort of clarified my whole life. And I was like 50 at the time, but like suddenly it clarified my whole life. Because when I reflected on the early stage of my life in junior high, high school, and college, like many of the people on the call, I could look back at that period and I was like, well, I was dabbling in photography. I was trying some creative writing. I went to film school briefly. I went to music school briefly. I dabbled in graphic design. I was basically cycling through all these different mediums, but through it all is this line that I was inherently a creator. I was inherently a maker. And I'm absolutely certain everybody on this call is that way as well, because otherwise they wouldn't be on this call at 7:30 at night when I'm sure they could be doing something else. So I'm confident that everybody joining us right now is in their heart a maker. And what you're looking for is your medium. And I realized when I listened to this podcast that my medium, I had found it and it was software. And I love software as a medium. I don't think of software as a tool. I don't think of it as a business. I think of it as an experiential medium on par with movies, music, and books. And I would actually say that if you really look at the last 20 to 30 years of society, that software has had a dramatically bigger impact on the world than either movies, music, or books. It is the most important cultural artifact being produced today, probably ever, and by a long shot. So I think whatever stage of your design career, but particularly when you're a young designer, I think if you can reconceptualize yourself as being an actor in this medium, it can better prepare you for what you're going to be dealing with. Because what you're going to be dealing with is going to be challenging, right? I mean, working in any medium is challenging. Try, go be a professional musician or a professional movie maker. Those are very hard as well. People do it because they love the medium, and it's that love of the medium that gets them through those tough moments in their career. Now, our tough moments in the career are going to be fighting with product managers, struggling with engineers, having ideas shot down by executives, trying to find the right idea. I mean, our struggles are unique to our medium, but the struggles are real and they never go away. And if you think they're going to go away, you're not really going to last very long. If you embrace them as the cost of admission to be in this medium, you can get through them a lot easier. And then I like to point out that the fact that things are so hard is actually an indication that the stuff we're working on really matters. If it was really easy, it'd kind of be an indication nobody really cares. But it turns out that this stuff is very high stakes. There's unbelievable amounts of money at stake, and there's all unbelievable amounts of cultural influence. You think about the difference a design decision that Apple could make, or Airbnb, or there in India, what Squiggy could do. I mean, small changes, iconography changes, text changes, color changes, like those things can have massive, massive impacts socially. So I mean, I could go on more about junior designers and things that you might want to consider, but that's sort of a mindset shift that I would encourage everybody to make, because it'll help you through the dark spots, because there's going to be dark spots. That's how it goes. So
Yeah, that was in fact, it answered, or it would have given clarity on a lot of other questions, which I also keep hearing that, hey, and we have one in the chat also, that, hey, can a product designer become a product manager? Or we have the other way around. Can I transition to product design being, let's say you took an example of movie buff or something like that, right? So
yeah.
can we, like, I think, it answers, it gives that clarity that you should be like, you should explore those areas and be a better problem solver or better designer in that case. um with this, uh, I would want you to like share your thoughts again from my basket of questions. Your thoughts on designing something at scale, and when we are starting from scratch, like not like, the small tweaks or taking that product, an existing product, to scale, but rather when we are starting a new product and how to take it at scale.
Yeah, so we had this problem with ThoughtSpot when I showed up. The company already had a product in flight. We had a design team that by the time I left, we were up to about 20 people. So certainly not on the scale of Apple, but enough folks that you needed to coordinate a lot of different minds so that the product looked like it came from a single person. Right? If you think about movies and video games, they do a great job of creating an artifact that looks like it came from a single person, even though it was worked on by hundreds or thousands of people. And they do it because they have this very powerful creative position called the director, right? And in design, we don't have that. The way design works is a little bit more like a democracy. It's a little bit more like a legislature, right? Where there's a lot of different people operating on their own timelines with their own ideas, advocating for different things, and you're hoping that what comes out at the end makes sense as a unified thing. But it's very hard to do. And as a design leader in Apple, the way it scales at Apple, honestly, is there's a very small number of tastemakers in the company, and everything goes to them. There's probably less than a dozen people. And most all the work was seen. Everything that I did, for certain, like every pixel I worked on in the 6 years I was running design for the online store, every pixel was seen by our vice president, Jennifer Bailey, who at the time ran the Apple online store. Today she runs Apple Pay. While Steve Jobs was alive, he saw every important pixel that the company shipped, like all of them. That's what he did as a CEO. He did creative reviews pretty much all day, every day. That doesn't work in most other companies. So at ThoughtSpot, what I did is I borrowed one of the techniques I learned at Apple, and that's also a story worth telling. So when they got ready to work on Keynote, there's a guy named Roger Rosner, and Roger's VP of Apps still to this day at Apple, but he used to be the guy that led engineering and design for all of the iWork apps. So that would included Pages, Keynote, Numbers, and some other products. And Roger came to the company right after the Next acquisition back in 1997. And one of the first things that he did at Apple was to create the product we now call Keynote. So when they got ready to work on Keynote, he went to Steve and he said, "Hey, Steve, how should we think about Keynote?" And Steve said, "Look, you need to keep in mind three things. One, it needs to have cinematic quality transitions. Two, it needs to be difficult to make ugly presentations. And three, you need to optimize for innovation over PowerPoint compatibility." Now, each one of those three lines, those are what I call design tenets. They're not principles, and I'll distinguish those two in a second. Each one of those tenets is a hard edge statement where you're saying, no, we're going to go down this road and not that road. And if we take that last one in particular, optimize for innovation over PowerPoint compatibility. Everybody on this call who's worked on a team knows that if that question is not singularly answered at the beginning, the team is going to spend the rest of the time gouging each other's eyes out about that issue going back and forth, right? So by him just putting a stake in the ground and said, this is what we're going to do, he took all this downstream debate off the table, right? And so when I got to ThoughtSpot, I knew I wanted to do the same thing. And I'm going to go back to this idea of tenets versus principles. Virtually every design team has principles. There's like whole websites dedicated to just looking at principles from design teams. And the principles tend to be things like clarity, simplicity, security, privacy. They're these sort of big aspirational words. And they're kind of useful, but they're sort of like saying, I don't know, be honest and be kind, in sort of a human sense. I mean, they're good to put out there, but nobody's ever going to argue the other side of them. So they're not useful as a design tool, right? Like if we said, oh, make it simple, nobody's going to sit around and go, no, I don't want to make it simple. We should make it complicated as hell. That's definitely the way to do it. So, just saying you want something to be simple is never going to help you make a decision. So at ThoughtSpot, we had three tenets. I haven't been there for a few months. I'm gonna see if I can remember them now. One of them was the entire product should look and feel like it came from a single mind. Right, so that was a tenet we had, that the whole thing had to be unified, and that informed how we thought about the use of the design system and the adherence to the design system. Many other companies can choose to create products that are highly fragmented. Maybe that's the best way to get to market quickly, right? There's plenty of products that take that approach as well. I would argue probably Salesforce takes more of that approach, for example. And they can be very successful having highly fragmented products. Amazon might be the best example there. Amazon puts a lot of stuff into market really fast. It doesn't really fit together holistically, but we all kind of deal with it because I guess we like getting our stuff on time. I think is mostly why we put up with it. But saying you wanted a product that looked like it came from a single mind was a clear tenet. Another tenet was documentation is end user documentation is a failure state, right? So what we believe is anytime somebody had to read the documentation, the design had failed. That was fundamentally different from when I started. When I began, over and over, I'd be in meetings where I'd hear product managers say, "Oh, well, we can just put that in the documentation, or let's create a little hover card, or we'll do one of those little stupid little dot icons. People can roll over it, and we'll tell them what it is." I considered every one of those to be a massive failure. Nobody wants to learn these products. Doesn't matter the product. Nobody wants to learn them. So if they're not immediately intuitive or at least explorable on the surface, something's gone wrong. And people will say, well, it's a really complicated product. You have to use documentation. Guess what? Video games are really complicated too, and people learn those all the time without turning to documentation. So the question is your product explorable and discoverable, and does it behave in a predictable way? And then I'm trying to remember what the last tenet was, and I can't believe I can't remember it. But you get I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point. But you get the idea that there was three tenets, and that we tried to make these hard edge statements that were different from just these principles. And I found that to be a key to how the company operated, and a key to how we were able to keep things aligned. And I would state these. It was kind of funny. One of the tenets, the last one about end user documentation is a failure state. I mentioned that one time on a call with the team at Toast. It's an American company that makes this handheld point of sale system. So I mentioned that on their call, and then the head of their design team told me that like 3 weeks later, he heard somebody saying that line in one of their meetings at Toast. And I was like, yeah, like these ideas, a really successful tenet, when you get it out there, it just kind of wormholes its way into the company. and you'll start to hear people across the company use it. And that's when you know you've kind of had a successful way of getting people to think in the same direction, right? And that's, I mean, maybe that's sort of the punchline to the overall comment is if you could find a way to get people to think in the same direction, that's the best way to unleash designing at scale. Because you'll get kind of everybody at least they're all rowing the boat in the same direction. It's very hard to make everything. Getting everything to look like it came from a single mind is really hard. Like you have to have a lot of authority, and very few designers have that. Very few design executives have that. Very few design teams have that. Hopefully, you have an enlightened CEO who believes in that, and they can create some mechanisms. But even so, it's going to be hard for a large company to create stuff that we're going to all experience as looking like it came from a single mind. So if you can get everybody again kind of thinking in the same direction, that's a huge win, and something that if you can do that, it will outlast your time at the company by years, if not decades.
Yeah, this was like a few points which I also will be taking back from here. Like when you mentioned that the CEO, or like it is coming from top to bottom, like that on hands-on culture, that hands-on culture, that every pixel was reviewed or verified or validated. I believe, yes, it would be taking like a lot of effort and everything. And then you spoke about tenets. We also say it as traps. What is not meeting what. So one thing which comes to my mind is the right collaboration, because as you said, at scale there are so many pieces that a team would be working on. There would be various teams working on various pieces, and it's sort of the team becomes like a silo or a bunch of people working in silos. um, with this, I would come to the last question from the bucket that I have. How did you balance and managed your counter parts or your stakeholders when it comes to you as a designer, but working or collaborating with engineers, product managers, data scientists, analytics, so many folks out there?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll go back to my experience at Apple. So when I joined in 2006, the first year you were at Apple, at least at that point, 2006, a long time ago. But when I was there at that point, during your first year, you got to go see the executives speak. So once a quarter, you could get to go over to the big conference hall there at Infinite Loop and hear one of the executives speak. And the year I was there, one of the executives that spoke was Johnny Ive. So of course, all of us designers dutifully went over and sat there in our black T-shirts and listened to Sir Johnny, share some of his wisdom with us, which was memorable and useful. And one of the things Johnny said that really stuck with me that I've tried to carry through in my career was stick to your role. He was like, look at it, your success at Apple is going to be do your job and don't worry about everybody else, right? Like when I was at Yahoo, everybody was in everybody's business, right? Like the designers were second guessing the PMs were second guessing engineering was second guess design. Like everybody was second guessing everybody, and Yahoo was profoundly dysfunctional at that point. At Apple, everybody played their part, and they didn't try to cover everything else. They just trusted that all their teammates were going to do what they were going to do. And you can compare it to like a sports team, in American baseball or cricket, they're in India, like people can't be trying to grab the ball from each other. Like you kind of have to spread the field and people have to play their position. Otherwise, it's not a team sport and things kind of fall apart and the team comes to hate each other. So what I tried to do at ThoughtSpot was be very clear about the role of the product managers. And in my head, in an enterprise software company, the role of the product managers is to manage the business of the product, and most importantly, to set the roadmap and the priorities. That was the number one thing. They had more contact with the customers. They understood more what was going to affect the business trajectory of the company, and they were way closer to understanding the problem space. We were a very technical data analytics product. Nobody on my design team was hired for having that kind of knowledge. We didn't have great access to users, which is very hard to get in enterprise software companies because most enterprise companies are actually led by sales. And the sales, as you guys probably know, and the sales team often kind of creates this buffer between the product team and their customers. And so for us to be able to actually talk to users in real time was just not a nut I cracked over the 4 years I was there. So I just chose to trust the product managers, and whatever feature they said we should do, I believe that's what we should go do. In return, I wanted them to leave us alone to create the design. I didn't want them second guessing stuff. I didn't want them questioning things. There was natural creative tension, and certainly people can ask for explanation and rationale and give us feedback and try to make the work all it should be. But at the end of the day, I expected them to trust our intuition on the design in the same way we trusted their intuition and processes on the roadmap. And then the same thing with engineering. Like, we trust if they say this is easy and that's hard, or that's going to take time and this is easy, like, we trusted that and we took it as a constraint. So I would say the, look, these interactions with product and engineering and other parts of the company can get super contentious, like really contentious. And design, if you allow an environment to foment where there's animosity between the groups and there's a breakdown in the collaboration, design will suffer. Like, nobody in this call should fool themselves that design has some ultimate power here. We're the smallest team by numbers. We have the smallest budget. We are the most expendable, as we've recently seen. So you have to find a way to play nicely, or you're probably not going to get invited to play at all. That said, I'd encourage everybody to remember also that we have unbelievable amounts of power, in that we control the comps, right? I always told my team, like, by the time you take a comp into a meeting, you've already won like 95% of the argument, because all they're going to be talking about is your design. So as long as you basically like the thing that you're showing, you've already won. You don't really have to push back. You can just take the work in there. You don't have to try to defend it at every turn. Like, just listen to the feedback, take notes, and then you can go back and revise it. But don't let the meeting get contentious, and don't, certainly never try to design in real time. Like, don't try to take in the feedback and then adjust your design in real time in the meeting. And don't do that for a couple reasons. One, you're probably going to come up with the wrong thing because you're just going to instinctively react, and it's probably going to be the wrong move. So for one, the design you come up with in real time is going to be the wrong thing. The other thing is it's going to make design seem way easier than it actually is. What happens when you start designing in real time is all those product managers go, oh, they can do this in real time. Why don't we just get them in here and give them a whiteboard, and they'll be done with this big dialog box design in 15 minutes. And that's not how it works. You need time to play with different ideas. The other thing that we did at ThoughtSpot, that slightly tangential here, but one of the things we did at ThoughtSpot, for any of you who are working at smaller enterprise companies, it wouldn't work at Microsoft, but at a company with a few hundred people, maybe up to 1,000, what we did is we realized we needed to design. We needed to design out loud, right? We needed everybody to be able to see what we were doing, because they just had no idea. Like, UX design is a very new field. Most of the people on the call, their parents probably have no idea what you do. I'm sure that many of you spend lots of times trying to justify to your parents what you're studying in school and what you're actually doing with your career, because just people don't get it. My parents to this day don't get it. I've been doing it for 35 years. My wife barely gets it, right? So it's a very abstract profession. And I realized that, like, our sales team, our marketing team, they had no idea what my group did. And so we started to design out loud. And the form that took is we made a Loom video every week. And it started with me sort of introducing things we were working on that week. And then we had our group was divided into 2 different design studios that had a half dozen designers in each one. Each of those studios had their projects going on. And the projects go through all sorts of different phases, like super formative phases where we're just working in really loose wireframes. There's researched artifacts. Then there's, like, various revisions around visual design, things like that. And whatever those studio managers wanted to show that week that they thought would be useful, that would be part of the Loom video as well. And it could be, again, it could be a project at any stage of development. It wasn't, in fact, it was rarely the finished thing. What we were trying to do is show people all the work that goes into creating the final thing. So there'd be, again, on the video, there'd be me starting out, then there'd be a section with 2 of these studio managers, and then I'd come back at the end with some design story from Apple or something else, right? And the whole thing was about a 25-minute video, and we kind of released it every week like it was a TV show. And we did that, I think we got to about 35 weeks before, honestly, I just got tired of doing it. I just sort of ran out of gas doing it. But still, that 35 episodes was seen by hundreds of people across the company. And when I would go to sales conferences or company kickoffs and things like that, people that I had never met would come up and start talking to me like they knew me because they recognized me from the videos. And I do think we had some sort of impact on different people inside the company because they could see the kinds of issues we were dealing with. And probably one of the most impactful moments we had is there was one video where one of the studio managers would try to show a design component from our design system. They were trying to show how we'd landed on this one thing. And so he starts out in the video and he shows that one thing, but then in in Figma, then he starts to zoom out. And as he zooms out in Figma, you can see all the other variations start to get exposed. And you realize that we looked at like 65 different things before we decided on the one, which is what a lot of design teams do. And what we were trying to say in that moment was, hey, that random idea you had when you first glanced at it? It's probably likely that we've already looked at that one. Like, I know you only see the one thing at the end, but it's quite likely we've considered a lot of other stuff. If it was obvious to you, trust me, we probably hit it because we've been doing this for many, many years, and there's dozens and dozens of ideas that we would have that you as a salesperson probably wouldn't have. So again, that was sort of a way of trying to demonstrate to people that we were professionals and we knew what we were doing and we weren't just making this stuff up. And it wasn't nearly as easy or as obvious as it would appear. And it's one of the challenges. Whether this is true in a portfolio as well. So if you're looking for a job, this is useful. But also if you're just showing work, like if you have a killer design idea, it's going to be obvious to the audience once you show it. And they're not really going to know how to respond to it. So the horrible paradox of really crushing it with the design presentation is that nobody says anything. They just all kind of sit there and nod because it all makes sense. And it's incredibly deflating as a designer, but it is the biggest victory you will ever have. One way to counter that is to do before and after presentations if you can. So I did this on a project I worked on for Apple Retail, where I was working on the handheld point of sale system they had inside the store. And the handheld point of sale system they had at the time was considered the best in the world. It was phenomenal, but it took like 12 taps for somebody to sell you like a hard drive, like a single item accessory. It took about 12 taps on this little thing. And I'd come up with a design where it didn't take any taps whatsoever. It was all just affordances based off the rotation of the device and when you swiped a credit card. There were some reasons that my design didn't actually work technically, but at least it showed a vision of how much simpler it could be. And so in that presentation, instead of trying to front load it with all this research and all these goals and all this sort of stuff, which frankly everybody would have tuned out if I'd done all that stuff, what I did is I had a demo and I said, okay, here's what it's like today to buy to buy a hard drive at Apple Retail. Dot, 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 click, 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 click. There it is. You all know it. You all love it. The best handheld point of sale system ever conceived by God or man. There it is. Boom. Let me show you a different idea. And then I did my idea, which was only one click, and the contrast was phenomenal. And people would spontaneously start clapping when they saw it. And then once I had that moment, once I caught their attention that way, then I could go into all the design rationale, and then I could explain the design, and people would sit through it at that point. And this is something I often try to point out to younger designers in their portfolio. When you're showing your portfolio, like don't lead up with all that case study stuff. Don't spend your precious time in a live interview doing all the setup before you show the work. The work is the only thing that matters. Like you've got to lead with the work. And you've got to lead with the work in a story-based system. Again, in my model with the product I was just showing or just describing, I had the story of, somebody comes into the store, they want to buy a hard drive, here's how they would do that. I didn't I didn't show kind of a screen-by-screen tour of the product, which is what I mostly see people do. It's still what my team at ThoughtSpot did at the end. They would show me, oh, here's this dialogue, and then here's that dialogue, and here's this page, which is how you write end user documentation. Like that's how you write the manual. That's not the story of how you would use the product. So whether you're demoing a feature you've been working on in your design, in your regular day job, or trying to put together your portfolio, come up with the story of how somebody accomplishes a goal with your design, and then use that design, use that story to pull people through the design and lead with that, right? Start with that. And then once you've got the audience's attention, then you can backfill it with all the rationale. And I describe this style of communication. And when you're doing these presentations, you can communicate in headlines or you can communicate in punchlines, right? So in a punchline, like a joke, you're front loading everything and then you're delivering the big news at the end. You get to do the punchlines if you're Steve freaking Jobs and you're announcing the iPhone in 2006. Like the whole thing is a big punchline. He talks about the current state of the technology, all these different things that are going on, and then he reveals the iPhone, and it's this big moment, and it's this amazing punchline. But he's Steve Jobs. Like he's already earned everybody's attention and respect with his career. So everybody's going to think there's anybody in this call that has that level of gravitas. Maybe there is, and I just don't know them. But I certainly don't have that level of gravitas. Like I haven't earned that from the audience. So in my presentations, I start with the headline. Here it is. Here's the design. Now that I've got your attention, now I'm going to backfill it with all the other stuff. Um, and once you have that mental switch, I think people will have a lot more success with their portfolio presentations, even with their presenting regular design work. And since you kind of got me on this thread with younger designers, I'll stop after this one last piece of advice. I do talk to young designers all the time through ADP List and elsewhere, and they show me the portfolio site, and their portfolio sites have these massive use cases where they've obviously spent countless late nights trying to fill in personas and use cases and all this other stuff. It's just all this text. And I always hate to break it to them, but there is not a person alive that's going to read all that text. It is never going to get read. As a hiring manager, I would just scroll through it all. All I wanted to see was the comps. I just wanted to see the story of the design. And usually those pictures were buried at the very bottom. They were tilted or hard to see, or they didn't really hang together. So, like, most of these sites are a massive letdown for me as a hiring manager. The thing I think would be successful, I haven't seen anybody do this yet, but it's something easy to experiment with. I would love to see a portfolio site where somebody has a Loom video of them walking me through the design. So you imagine, again, sort of this use case of somebody saying, oh, here's how I use the software to accomplish this goal. There's the software running, your Figma prototype, and there's your little face down in the corner, and you're telling me about the design. And you get about 2.5, 3 minutes to show it to me, right? And the benefit to me as a hiring manager is I'm instantly going to be able to understand your presentation skills, your storytelling capacities. I'm going to understand, so I'm going to get some sense of your presence, which is a huge factor in whether or not I want to hire you, because those skills are going to determine how successful you are in the job. So you can't really hide behind static images on your website. I kind of need to see you talking and presenting. And then hearing you tell the story of the product and how enthusiastic you might be would be really important for me. So I think there's a possibility for people to start to distinguish themselves with these videos. And by the way, like most of the people on this call, you guys are all the video generation. I'm sure you're all already making videos for various things, TikTok or whatever the medium might be. And they're super easy to make, certainly wildly easier to make than writing these super long case studies. At ThoughtSpot, we had everybody make a video every day. At the end of everybody's day, they had to make a 1-minute video just describing what they did that day and what they were going to do the next day. And then they posted it on a Slack channel where the whole team could watch each other's videos. And it was sort of a way that we did a virtual stand-up every day. And so people just got in the habit of making these videos. And it was always funny because when a new employee came along, it would take them about 2 weeks to make their first video because they were so intimidated. And they'd end up doing like 15 takes for their first video. But by the time you do like your 7th video, you just sit down and make the video and you stop thinking about it. And so it's hard to make your first video for your portfolio, but it'll be super easy to make your 4th. And so I just encourage people to at least try that. Worst case scenarios, you end up with a video you can put on YouTube, like, or Instagram or something, right? I mean, there's no downside to that approach. So
This was amazing. In fact, like what I took from this is that okay, if you can explain what you have done in like 3 or 4 minutes, that's the most crispiest way to do it. I think if not, then we are just maybe just using some other mediums to hide like the exact like the core thing of it. I see one question in the chat, which is very interesting. Like, how has the experience of being a designer who is just starting out changed over the past 3 decades compared to today?
Well, I think it was a different kind of challenge then. So in full disclosure aside, my first design job was in 1990, which is well before probably anybody on this call was born. I moved to Silicon Valley from Dallas, where I am now. I moved there on Labor Day of 1990, which was also happened to be my 27th birthday. So I'm just turned 61. So I've spent well over half my life in Silicon Valley now. And when I started in design, there was probably only a few hundred people in the world that were doing UI design. Like when I went to Config in San Francisco a couple months back, and I think they had 8,000 people in the conference hall and then 250,000 people on the live stream. I can promise you that when I started into design, there were not 8,000 people in the world that were doing UI design. Not even close, So that was a different kind of challenge. And then we went kind of through this fun phase. I mean, through the 90s, I think design was trying to find its footing. And then in the 2000s, with the advent of the internet, what happened in the internet is basically engineers realized they needed graphic design support because they didn't have an operating system to rely on anymore. And so as the internet takes off, you get this big wave of graphic designers coming in to make things look different, but they weren't necessarily UI designers. And that's why you had all this stuff around usability and all those struggles. And you had books like Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, which sort of became this Bible of how to deal with that era. Because you had a bunch of people who had created basically poster and business card designers coming in trying to design websites. And there's a dance to a website that doesn't exist in a piece of graphic design. I sort of compared it's the difference between still photography and making a movie. And still photography is a necessary ingredient to be a great movie maker, but being a movie maker is a lot more involved than being a still photographer. They're two different things. And so graphic designers don't just immediately drop into doing software. So that was sort of the struggle in the 2000s. And then the phone came out. And when the iPhone came out, which was in 2006, or it was announced in 2007. And then the big thing is the App Store came out in 2008, and the App Store was released the summer of 2008 when Barack Obama was running for his first term as president of the United States, which some of you may or may not remember, but those of us in the States, like that's just not that long ago. And so what happened with the advent of the App Store is that suddenly software like really mattered, UI really mattered. And it mattered because suddenly people were interacting with software hundreds, if not thousands of times a day because they now had a computer in their pocket. And that put a completely different pressure on software design. And so then you had all these companies go nuts and hire tons of people. Lots of folks got involved. You had all these boot camps starting up. There was a lot of kind of underskilled people. They got pulled into the craft. And a lot of them, frankly, probably came in because they thought it was an easy job with a lot of money, which it was for a little while. But it's not anymore. And so there was sort of this period that was very easy to get into design and to make a fair bit of money and have a decent job, and maybe you would survive and maybe you wouldn't, but it was easy to get started. And then the period we're in now is I think design has matured to the point that it's a discovered creative profession. Everybody in tech at least knows what it is. Companies know how to hire for it. Universities now have decent programs. There's lots of self-learning programs as well through Maven and elsewhere. So it's a discovered creative profession. And in that regard, it's essentially the same thing as a career in movies, music, photography, books, all that sort of stuff, right? And I think as somebody coming into the profession now, you have to have that mentality. You have to realize, I'm going to go be a creative professional now. I'm going to be competing with a whole bunch of people who have a ton of passion and are willing to do this for free for a really long time. So I have to figure out some way to outlast them, which means if I choose to go into this, it may be 3 to 5 years before I get a real job doing this. And I have to figure out some way of staying in the game. If I was an actor, I would expect to wait tables for a while I was trying to get my big break. If you're a designer, you got to find some way to keep yourself busy while you're waiting for your big break. You got to find some way to do side projects for nonprofits in your neighborhood. You got to go down to that corner restaurant and ask them if you can redesign their website for them. You got to try to be friends with engineers who might have some side projects. Maybe try to meet some investors who could introduce you to a few founders. Like you got to find some way just to stay engaged as a creative professional. And again, I think it's a mindset shift, right? And it goes back to what I said at the beginning about you have to think of software as a medium. And so you're fortunate in that you get to be a creator working in this amazing medium, but it's a different kind of career, and it's not going to be there's not a straight path to getting into it at the beginning. And once you get in, it's still kind of you're gonna have everybody's gonna have their own bespoke career. It's not going to be like being an attorney or being a doctor or something where you're moving up the ladder. That's just not what a creative profession's about, and it's never that way. And you have to stop thinking about it that way. So. Yeah, I guess that would be my main advice. You kind of need to reset your expectations. That period we came through where people just graduated college and got picked up, that was the aberration. Like that was the weird part. This is the normal part. There is no going back to that. We will not be going back to that. This is what we're doing now. And so there's going to be a lot more pressure on jobs. It's going to be a lot harder to come by. If you're not really into AI and you don't understand that, you don't understand how to leverage it to make yourself more productive, you're not going to make it. That would be like, I don't know, it'd be like being a filmmaker and not understanding the most recent technology. Like, you can't go be a filmmaker and not understand CGI. Like that doesn't work anymore. So if you're going to be a designer, you got to understand AI and how it can be used in your own workflow, how to implement it, or how to think about it in the context of your products, etc. Um, so
Maybe finding more creative ways to stay updated to be in this creative field.
well, one thing I tell people is, you're a creator in this medium, and you should learn the medium. If you were a young jazz musician and I asked you your favorite band, I am absolutely certain you would come at me with like 5 or 10 favorite bands, and you'd have your favorite records and your favorite songs and your favorite little riffs, and you'd know the story of them. This is how that album was made. Miles Davis was in the studio in 1954 in New York when this thing happened. He had a cup of coffee and then he blew this amazing solo. Like, you would know the whole thing inside and out. And yet, over and over, when I ask young designers what their favorite apps are, they kind of stumble. Who are your favorite designers? They kind of stumble. What did you see today in the world that was an interesting piece of software? They kind of stumble. Like, I still, to this day, this is what keeps me going. To this day, I'm just going around noticing software all the time. I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth airport yesterday, and I took pictures of these signs that they have out front the bathrooms. They have these big dynamic signs in front of the bathrooms that show you how many stalls are open, right? Like, I've never seen that before. I was like, wow, that's really handy. And like, that's some kind of crazy technology. Like, they have some way of monitoring how many people are in the bathroom. It's like it was a parking lot with the number of open parking spots, except it was a bathroom with the number of open spots for the bathroom. And so I'm like taking pictures of it, to the sort of confusion of the people sitting with me on the plane. I'm taking pictures of the in-seat UI because it was kind of interesting, some of the stuff they were doing with the mapping technology in particular. So like, I'm noticing software all the time. And I know all these designers. I know how Instagram came about. Susan Kerr, who designed the original Mac in 1984, she was on my team at Pinterest. I know where those ideas came from. Like, do you know the history of software? And we could talk about the history of software. That'd be a whole nother like 2 hour call. But do you know the history of your medium? And if you know that and you have that enthusiasm, then you start to realize, oh, I'm part of a long tradition of software design and these ideas, and you feel part of something that's much bigger, and that helps a lot as well, because it helps you from feeling so isolated. I think a lot of designers, they just feel isolated in time because they feel like they're the only person to ever deal with this issue before. And it's like, no, these issues of how to collaborate with PM and engineering and how to balance, innovation versus predictability, like all these issues, people have been dealing with this stuff for decades. Um, so there's plenty of things to go learn from and people to relate to.
I think you answered. So I could see a lot of questions coming in that, okay, what do you look, when you are interviewing somebody? So yeah, this is what he looks for. Like, stay curious, be
Well,
like,
I'll tell you.
observe a
So
lot of things.
yeah, so again at ThoughtSpot, we had we wanted our hiring to be super simple, and so we created a competency map where we had 10 different competencies, and the competencies fell into three different buckets. There was hard skills, soft mindset, so hard skills, mindset, and context. The hard skills were information architecture, interaction design, visual design, and then pitching and storytelling. And so everybody got rated on those four things. And everybody got rated whether you were an existing employee or a candidate, right? It was the same criteria. So we had those four for hard skills. And then the three mindset skills were proactive and curious, collaborative and teamwork, and then critical and original thinking. And that last quite a few people out of there. And I think it was 2 years ago, we hired 4 designers in one of the hiring rounds there. And the guy that I interviewed with, he didn't know this at the time, but at some point in the interview, he pulled out his sketchbook and he started showing me his sketchbook. And the fact that he did hand sketches and that he was thinking that way completely sealed the deal. Like I decided to hire him in the spot on that moment because he was sketching, you know.
Wow.
So it's yeah, those are the things that can put somebody.
Yeah, I think that so like it's so effortless because people keep asking how can I stand out, and they sometimes don't know that they are already standing out. Like they are already doing something which is so unique, I think.
Yeah, you have to do something different, and like people think about the format of a portfolio, like if I look at a lot of these portfolios, they're all kind of the same. They kind of look like Squarespace sites. The typography's kind of okay. There's a picture of somebody at the top, and then there's some sort of statement, but the statement is usually like, "My name is so and so. I'm from such and such. I'm an interaction designer who wants to make the world easy to use." Okay, I mean that doesn't that doesn't really distinguish you. There needs to be more to it than that. It needs to be some sort of unique artist statement, and that's not something I can give you, right? You kind of have to find that in your own heart. But I like to push people to ask themselves truly, deeply, why did you get into design? There are so many easier things you could have done, right? And anybody that's in design is smart. You can't be in design and not be a curious, smart person. It doesn't work. So because you're a smart, curious person, you have lots and lots of different opportunities in life, but for some reason you chose this one. So why is that? And put that out there and stand behind it and really know what that is. In my case, when I was 11 years old was the first time I saw a computer, and I won't tell you the whole story, but the first time I saw a computer, I remember it like it was yesterday, and I fell in love with computing. And deep in my heart, I think of computing as one of the modern miracles of being alive today. It's right up there for me with jet travel and broadcast TV. Like it is something that the royalty of ages would have never been able to possibly understand what we can do with computing. And we take it all for granted because it's so ubiquitous in our world. But it is a miracle of modern life. And because of that, it absolutely breaks my heart when it doesn't work right and it confuses people. I find it to be a moral failing. And I mean this like in a really deep moral sense. When I'm at an airport and I watch somebody struggling to navigate the airport because of a poorly designed piece of software, I feel in my heart that some company has seriously failed that person, right? Like at a deep moral, unconscionable level. And they've done it because they were sloppy and in a hurry, and they didn't think deeply about how they were affecting people that were using the software. And all of us have those encounters with software multiple times a day. We all use software that doesn't work right, and we sort of accept it, but we shouldn't. Like we've allowed a certain mindset to take over the digital built environment, and we've created a digital built environment that is very inhospitable to human beings. It's ugly, it's confusing, it's difficult to navigate, and it's a tragedy. It's causing us to waste unbelievable amounts of human energy and emotion and excitement. And like that's what it should be like when you use a piece of software, man. You should feel like it is just the most miraculous thing you've ever experienced. And occasionally some of us will have that. Occasionally you get that with ChatGPT. It'll do something that's kind of unexpected, or you'll launch an app and it'll just be beautiful and blow you away. Like occasionally we get that, but we should get that all the time. That's what it should feel like every time. So that's what drives me and why I do these calls, because I'm trying to inspire all of you to go think that way about software, because I really think we should have an amazing digital built environment, and that's what motivates me. All of you need to kind of figure out what it is that motivates you.
Yeah, yeah. I think this also answers, though I know we are already over time.
Yeah.
But I think whenever we are asked that, okay, what do you do as designers, like you also said, I think it's so easy to say, like to my parents, I mostly say, okay, whenever you are stuck in that app, it's stuck because there was not a good designer. So that's what we do. We solve those all those issues. So I
Yeah, that makes it sound like we're the people that clean up after the elephants in the circus, though. And that's not the way I think about it.
yeah. So, but yeah. This like I can go on and on, I think, forever, and I think audience is also really getting inspired with all the suggestions and your experiences that you have told. They are simply like just invaluable. But yeah, for now, I think we'll keep this till now, today's session. But again, really, really thank you, Bob, for sharing those insights. For me personally, it was a really nice conversation, fun conversation. I would love to connect, further. And yeah, thank you, audience. Thank you, FOF team, for organizing this wonderful session. And have a good evening and a good day. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, thank you, thanks for hosting, Serby, and thanks everybody for joining along. It's great to see everybody.
Thank you, folks. Bye bye.